Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I want to go ahead and talk to you about capital ship class weaponry. Now, as the game progresses and we start to see more of the big ships being developed, I think we're going to get more information regarding this stuff, but at the moment it seems like Bering's Applied Technology Department is the primary source for the weapons being provided to the UEE Navy. Now, there's three primary capital class weapon types that we're going to talk about, with those being turrets, railguns, and torpedoes. Starting in the turret category, there's two types of turrets that really cover two different purposes, almost like offense and defense. The first of which is the ASA, or anti-ship artillery variety, which takes on more of a defensive role, really designed primarily to protect large ships from incoming attackers, like bombers or fighters that are trying to come in and do their damage. ASA turrets are typically placed around a ship to almost give this total bubble of deterrency that prevents ships from attacking at most angles without sustaining some damage, making the goal of these turrets almost an equation. How much risk are the attackers willing to take on, considering that risk ranges from some damage to death? Now, the turrets themselves are generally a bit lighter with smaller weapons, making them capable of very rapid movements and capable of tracking a smaller and faster target with a fairly good firing arc, which is important considering the capital ship isn't going to be able to maneuver to keep smaller ships in focus. The armament is typically smaller-sized energy weapons that are able to capitalize on large power plants of these ships without the drawbacks of ammo reloads and capacity. ASA turrets are capable of attacking other large vessels, but they will have a shorter range than some other options, so they should be more of like a supplemental fire if you end up in close quarters large ship engagements. A good example of the type of weapons we're talking about would be on the Idris, where each of the turrets carry two size 3 M3C cannons on a size 5 turret. The Javelin has weapons of unknown size, but they currently have size 5 listed for the turret mount, so I would assume it's the same. They just get many more turrets at 13 ASA turrets compared to 6 that are actually on the Idris. Now, the ASA turrets can be a little bit varied as well in requirements, as the Idris, for example, utilizes manned turrets compared to the unmanned versions the Javelin uses. Now, both of these have values, but it kind of in different ways. Manned turrets allow for collaboration between the crew and allow for real-time human decisions to be made, which may add some benefit. You can also have people acting independently, picking targets and engaging as they see fit. The unmanned version is likely going to be much more accurate in landing shots, but you will be limited to what control options you have available. That may include things like a bubble defense, or you could potentially prioritize targets from the bridge, or these could almost act like a point defense system if the avionics on board can accommodate that. Neither is really a bad option, but they are just different in how they end up being deployed and how they're used. To really make a punch against other large targets, though, you need to move into the more offensive-minded turret types known as STS, or ship-to-ship turrets. The STS turrets are much more powerful than the ASAs are, focusing on firepower with the ability to puncture through shields and holes of other big ships. They're going to be bigger at the base to support bigger weaponry that's being used, and as a result of that, they're slower in their rotation and they have longer response times to actually get on target. This means that while the ASA turret can technically attack other big ships if they're within range, the STS turret is going to be having a hard time dealing with smaller and faster craft, though if it actually does end up landing a hit, it would be a pretty devastating blow. To give an idea of how these sizes vary a little bit, the Idris is currently slated to bring an M5C on the STS turret, which is two sizes bigger than its current ASA turrets, while the Javelin is going to bring two M6A lasers on its STS turrets. The scope is just entirely larger, and you can see that the Javelin is bringing more firepower through its ASA and much more through its two STS cannons, or I guess two STS turrets, with several more guns in total. The STS turrets are typically going to be controlled from the bridge by a weapons officer, as the space inside the turret is being taken up to really just mount a large weapon, not to house a person. Now, we do see these turrets at even larger sizes on ships like the Bengal, but we don't have details on what size weapons those actually are. There are probably going to be people out there thinking, well, turrets are in a terrible place, so why do I have faith that these turrets are going to be better at combat than what we have today? Which is a fair thought, but not entirely comparing apples to apples either. A Constellation, for example, has two turrets on board, but the ship is relatively agile for the size, and is going to be pitching and yawing and rolling constantly, making it hard for turret gunners to keep a bead on their targets. Now, while that experience is kind of destined to improve, the experience on a capital ship is already going to be a different beast. Capital ships are big, they're slow, they're powerful. They're not going to need to have the same types of reactions and take the same evasive maneuvers as a Constellation or really any other smaller ship that has a turret, because it can take the damage, it can absorb it in its shields, and it has more turrets, meaning that if you don't have a shot on one, you have a shot with others. You also have larger power plants and capital class coolers that allow you to fire for longer, and in short, you end up having a more durable and stable platform to gun from with lots of power to back you up, meaning you just focus on gunning, and that's not even including the fact that some of these are going to be auto turrets. Now, moving past turrets, we enter the realm of the railgun, with the prime example being the Shipbuster on the Bengal carrier, which is slinging 130mm slug at targets. Railguns are typically mounted to the center line of the ship that's carrying it, and are built on the same technology that we have in the mass drivers on the fighter side, just at a much larger scale, and capable of dealing much larger damage, like a Bengal being able to cripple a destroyer in a single hit. This is done through a series of thousands of magnets that propel the projectile through the chamber at just ridiculous speeds, providing incredible kinetic energy and very little reaction time once that thing's been released. Railguns in general are weapons that are going to suffer from a few drawbacks though, such as a long reload time, a significant charge-up time, and high heat production and power draw. Now, these can be mitigated a little bit by being on a capital ship with significant size components, but there is going to be a cooldown between these shots being released, meaning that there's going to be a lot of strategy in using them and fighting a force that's trying to use these against you. Now, there's a few other examples of capital ship railguns that we're familiar with, like the one on the Idris M, known as the Destroyer, listed at a size 5. Now, we don't have details on the size of that projectile, like in millimeters, but since the ship was really built around, or wasn't really built around it like it was on the Bengal, and it's really more of an add-on that's taking up interior space on the ship, it's safe to assume that it's going to be a much smaller projectile, but still very deadly. Now, on a larger scale, the Retribution class Super Dreadnought that's been teased, which appears to be 2 to 3 times the size of the Bengal, also has a railgun down the center line, which means that the projectile it would hurl would just be of absurd proportions. Now, torpedoes are kind of the last one we're going to talk about, and they sort of fall into this category as well, but that's starting to fall out of vogue a little bit based on some of the new ships that are being released. For example, when the Polaris was released, it was designed with size 10 torpedoes to allow for it to punch above its weight class, as it can carry 28 of them in total on a Corvette-class ship. Now, the new stealth bomber, the Eclipse, can carry 3 of the same size torpedoes in a relatively small and stealthy ship. So I don't think we can officially classify these as capital ship weapons anymore, but with that in mind, it can certainly supplement other weapons. The Javelin, for example, has a few torpedo bays on the ship, and the Polaris carries a bunch with some decent-sized torpedoes as well, which makes it pretty deadly on a ship that's pretty fast for its size and has some decent firepower, even if they're not going to necessarily be as sustainable as having a ship that's covered in STS turrets. Now, as we move forward, we may end up seeing new types of capital ship weapons introduced on a large scale, whether that be through just human ingenuity or maybe via the aliens that are in the game. I like to think that we're going to end up seeing a large beam cannon making an appearance at some point, which would have sustained damage at a high level as long as you're able to keep your target in sight and you can manage the heat and provide the power that's necessary to use a weapon like that. I'd also like to see some sort of larger sized ion type of cannon that's capable of disabling larger threats as opposed to splitting them in two. Now, I think both of these things are likely to be coming, but we'll have to keep an eye on the development cycle to see if that ends up coming to fruition. So that's going to do it for this video. If you guys have questions or comments regarding these capital ship weapons, please toss them in the comment section and I'll get to them. Otherwise, I appreciate you guys watching. Stay tuned for more and have yourselves a wonderful day. Take care.